hate. That is obviously a very strong word, but I'm using it for a very specific reason. And it all starts about 6 months ago when I was hanging out with one of my buddies, one of my boys. And after I left, I get a text from this exact friend. And it says, "Hey man, it was great seeing you. By the way, in a couple weeks, we'll be playing this gig. We need a guitar player. Do you want in?" And of course I said, "My bro, I will be there in a jiffy." And so he proceeds to give me the exact details for this gig. He says it's going to be exactly in 3 weeks. It's mostly songs that he knows I've played before because we've played together before. And I'm like, let's go. Now, here's the deal. Because I am a guitar player and because I am a massive procrastinator and laziness is something that I've been trying to fight, I knew it would be in my best interest to start learning the songs immediately. But unfortunately, once again, I let laziness win. And I decided that since I already played most of these songs before, I could just re-rehearse all the parts 2 days before. No one's going to get hurt, no problems. However, once I logged into my computer and I opened that email and saw that Google Doc with all the songs, I'm running down the songs and I'm like, I know this one, I know this one, I know this one. This is going to be simple. This is going to be super easy. That was until I opened the chord chart for the first song and I saw something interesting, something that I hadn't seen before, specifically with that particular song. It was a song that I had played a million times before. All of the chords were the same, all of the general parts were the same, but in the beginning of the arrangement, at the very top in bold letters, it happened to say, "Where the streets have no name, guitar intro." And immediately my stomach dropped. And if you're feeling any sort of level of cluelessness right now, let me explain. Michael, I truly don't understand. What do you have against U2? What do you have against The Edge? He's pretty much one of the most revered guitar players in the history of, well, ever. And it wasn't necessarily what I had against The Edge. It was actually more about this. What is this? This is a delay pedal. And for those of you who don't know, Where the Streets Have No Name has one of the most legendary and iconic dotted eighth note delays in the history of pretty much the known universe. And at the time, I hadn't really told anyone yet that I hated using delay live. And that's a really big thing coming from someone whose main gig was as a worship guitarist. But why? And it's actually quite simple when you break it down. You see, most of the time when I use delay, it was actually for very specific recording purposes. Times where I would plug my guitar into my virtual amp or even my real amp going into Logic. The reverbs would be big, but whenever I wanted to dial in a delay, I could get the exact setting. I could just type in, I want a dotted eighth note delay and I want this type of feedback. It's super easy and there are no controls that you really have to mess with without having to veer from a very specific preset that's very easy to use. So when I was told that I had to do this really iconic delay part and I was going to have to use my delay pedal, which at the time I had none, that didn't have a very specific millisecond counter, I would have to know the exact amount of feedback. All of those controls scared the pants off of me. I was so scared, in fact, that when I showed up to the gig, I didn't even want to attempt to learn it because all of those terms, all of them just scared me so badly that I just asked another guitar player who had a very specific delay pedal that he knew how to use to dial in my settings for me so I could bring it to the gig and not have to worry about anything. I really just felt in my head that other effects, they came really easy, you know? When I would bring my DS1 to a gig and I wanted distortion, I knew that there was just more distortion and less distortion. And when I brought my reverb pedal or some other time-based effects, I knew I just had to crank the mix knob. But like I said, as soon as I got all of these other parameters that I had to know, it was pretty much game over. Now, this was pretty much a secret that I was ready to keep hidden. But then I thought to myself, I really thought back to all my years of learning guitar, and I remembered that there was a time when distortion probably felt scary to use. There was a time when even the mix knob on a reverb probably felt like I was learning rocket science. And there has to be a time when I go into delay, I really go into how to use this. Kind of like with the question of learning music theory, I knew I wasn't going to become a master and I didn't have to know absolutely everything, but you're never smarter for not knowing something. So I pulled out my delay pedal. This is a rubberneck delay from DoD. It's fully analog, but more on that as we go. And I decided that it was time to begin challenging myself and learning. So basically, I decided to actually start with the easy stuff, like the simple questions like, what do the knobs even do? And I learned that time was the actual time between the repeats of the delays. That the repeats on this specific pedal, or feedback as it's sometimes referred to, is the amount of repeats that you're going to get, and the mix or the level is how loud it's actually going to be in conjunction and in comparison with the dry signal that you're sending in. I also started out with the easiest delay. You see, there's so many different genre types as well as different ways that you can set the knobs. So the easiest one that I wanted to start out with is actually called a slapback. You see, a slapback is a crazy short delay that has a really low, if any, feedback time, so really not any repeats, and it's usually used in a lot of like country and rockabilly stuff. You've probably heard it. It sounds kind of like this. Okay, so now that I learned a little bit more about slapback, I knew that it was time that I faced one of my biggest fears, which was getting into the dotted eighth territory and some of the longer delays that guys like the Edge use in Where the Streets Have No Name. So, like I said, this was going to be really, really scary because I didn't have the more specific parameters like I had in Logic, and I knew I was going to have to use my ears quite a bit. But that's kind of what makes this special, especially using an analog delay pedal like the one I'm using right now, which is specifically what the Edge uses because it's known for having a little bit of a warmer sound than a tape delay, and it also rolls off a little bit with every repeat. I knew that especially if I wanted that specific dotted eighth for like Where the Streets Have No Name, or even some of the more indie stuff that I've been looking into more recently, that there would have to be a much longer time between repeats, and I would have to turn the mix up a little bit heavier than I had been with the slapback, and really just play with some things when it came to feedback and really, really listening to the tracks. Okay, so after I learned how to dial in the dotted eighth setting and really use that at gigs, I wanted to experiment with a couple more longer delay times. And I learned that there's a lot of actual give and take with that. I found that a lot of the longer times can get more ambient. You aren't necessarily able to use as many repeats, because if you did that, it would get kind of jumbly and kind of nonsensical. That's obviously very, very wild, and it definitely took me a little bit more experimenting than with some of the other delay styles. But what I found that a lot of people do with this one, with really long delays, is you actually turn down the repeats till you're only getting one or two, and then you can get not just some really cool texture pieces, but some really cool stuff for even some solo guitar work that I feel works really well in not just ambient settings, but in any sort of mix. Now, to give you the entire truth, obviously there's more than just 3 types of delay that people use. And it would be completely dishonest of me to tell you that I've mastered delay in the last 2 or 3 months. But I do think I was completely limiting myself when it comes to one of the most important and creative effects when it comes to like both worship music and pop music, the music that I play the most. And I really do wonder what other effects that I do that with. Is it not just delay? Have I not taken the time to really dive into compression, even into some of the effects that I think I know, like distortion or fuzz, stuff that doesn't have quite as many complex parameters, but there are guys who have really taken the time to master it, and I think that's what puts them on that next level when it comes to tone. But all that to say, that's just what I've learned. I want to know what you think. Tell me how you feel about delay. Do you use it a lot? Do you use it a little bit? What type of delay do you use most in your rig currently? Let me know in the comments. But again, thank you so much for watching this video. So much fun just to be able to share some of what I've been learning over the past couple months, show you my process and how I learned some of this stuff, and just talk a little bit about delay. If you want to know anything more about the Rubberneck analog delay, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. Make sure to check it out. It's one of the best ways to support the channel. If that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear I used in this video, make sure to check out those links. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic day.